Begin. Tell us. Where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vic Castellano had built his life on precision. 20 years in the Marines, 15 of those in force reconnaissance, had taught him that preparation was everything. Every mission required intelligence, planning, and flawless execution. Now, at 42, he applied those same principles to his civilian life as a private security consultant for high-net-worth clients. His reputation was spotless, methodical, reliable, and utterly ruthless when necessary. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd failed to apply that same scrutiny to his marriage. 5 years ago, he discovered his wife of 12 years, Tessa Malone, had been sleeping with her yoga instructor, Blake Thornfield. Not just sleeping, she'd been planning to leave him, take their daughter Emma, and start fresh with her 28-year-old boy toy. Vic had confronted them both with military precision, presenting evidence, demanding answers. Tessa had the audacity to blame him for being emotionally unavailable and too controlling. Blake had actually tried to fight him, a mistake that left the younger man with a broken nose and a clear understanding that he should stay away from other men's families. The divorce had been brutal but swift. Vic's lawyer, Harold Brennan, was a pit bull who'd seen plenty of military divorces. Despite Tessa's attempts to paint Vic as unstable, his spotless service record and character witnesses had prevailed. Joint custody was awarded, but Vic had insisted on specific conditions. Any man Tessa dated seriously had to pass a background check. Emma couldn't be left alone with strangers, and all overnight arrangements required his approval. Tessa had violated those terms within 6 months by moving in with Blake. Vic's subsequent legal action had resulted in modified custody. Emma spent most of her time with him now, visiting her mother on scheduled weekends. It was an arrangement that worked, or so he'd thought. Last month, his mother, Elena Castellano, had suffered a massive stroke. At 78, she was the only family Vic had left, and he dropped everything to be by her side in Phoenix. Emma had been scheduled for her weekend with Tessa anyway, so extending it by a few days seemed reasonable. Tessa had agreed without argument. Unusual for her, but Vic had been too focused on his mother's condition to analyze it. Elena was stable now, showing signs of recovery that had her doctors cautiously optimistic. Vic had been planning to fly back to Seattle the next morning when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Seattle Metro Police. "Mr. Castellano? This is Detective Amy Rodriguez with Seattle PD. I need to inform you that your daughter, Emma Castellano, was found unconscious behind a commercial dumpster on Pine Street approximately 2 hours ago." The world tilted. Vic's training kicked in, gather information, assess the situation, act. "What's her condition?" "She's conscious now at Seattle Children's Hospital. Appears to be dehydration and exposure." "Sir, where is Emma supposed to be right now?" "With her mother, Tessa Malone, and her husband, Blake Thornfield. They live on Queen and Hill." Vic was already moving, grabbing his jacket, heading for the door. "We'll need to speak with them. Are you able to come to the hospital?" "I'm in Phoenix. I'll be on the next flight." The call to Tessa came 20 minutes later, after Vic had booked a red-eye and was driving to Sky Harbor Airport. She answered on the 4th ring, and he could hear music and laughter in the background. "Vic? God, it's like midnight there or what? Where's Emma?" "What do you mean?" "She's sleeping." "What?" "No, she's not. She was found unconscious behind a dumpster 2 hours ago. She's in the hospital." The line went silent for a moment. Then Tessa laughed, actually laughed. "Oh my God, really? She probably just wandered off. You know how she is, always exploring." Vic's hand tightened on the phone. "She's 8 years old, Tessa." "8? And you're laughing?" Blake's voice came through in the background, slurred with alcohol. "I just told her to go outside and play. Kids need fresh air." Vic hung up. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with rage so pure it felt like molten steel in his veins. He called Harold Brennan from the airport. "Harold, it's Vic. I need you to meet me at Seattle Children's Hospital tomorrow morning at 7. And I need you to call in every favor you have with Family Court. We're going to destroy them." Chapter 2. The Architect of Pain. The flight to Seattle was the longest 5 hours of Vic's life. He'd called the hospital 3 times, spoken with doctors, confirmed Emma was stable, but being held for observation. Dehydration, mild hypothermia, some scratches and bruises. She'd told the nurses she'd been playing outside when she got lost, but something in her voice over the phone when he'd finally been allowed to speak with her suggested there was more to the story. Harold met him at the hospital as promised, bringing coffee and a grim expression. At 65, Harold had the weathered face of a man who'd spent 3 decades fighting ugly battles in family court. He'd handled Vic's original divorce and had warned him then that Tessa was trouble. "Talk to me," Harold said as they walked through the hospital corridors. Emma was found behind a dumpster at 2 a.m., unconscious from exposure. "Why called Tessa?" She laughed. Blake admitted he told an 8-year-old to go outside and play at what had to be close to midnight. Jesus Christ. Harold's face darkened. CPS. Already involved. Detective Rodriguez said they're opening an investigation. Emma was awake when they reached her room, small and fragile-looking in hospital bed. But her eyes, her father's eyes, were alert and watching. She launched herself into Vic's arms when he entered, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and something else, fear. "Daddy, I was so scared. I couldn't find the house, and it got dark and cold." "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" The story came out in pieces. Blake had been drinking heavily, while Tessa was at what she called a girls' night. Around 11 p.m., Emma had asked for water. Blake had snapped at her, told her she was annoying, and ordered her to go outside and leave him alone. When she protested that it was dark, he'd physically pushed her out the back door and locked it. Emma had tried knocking, tried calling for Blake, but he'd passed out on the couch with music blasting. She'd attempted to walk to a neighbor's house, but gotten turned around in the unfamiliar neighborhood. She'd eventually collapsed behind the dumpster where a late-night delivery driver had found her. Harold took notes, his expression growing darker with each detail. "We'll need official statements from the doctors, the police report, everything. This isn't neglect, this is endangerment. Possibly abuse." After Emma fell asleep, Vic and Harold moved to the hallway. "I want them destroyed, Harold. Not just custody. I want their lives turned inside out." "Slow down, Vic. I know you're angry." "Angry?" Vic's voice was quiet, controlled. "I'm not angry. I'm calculating. You remember what I did for a living, Harold? I solve problems permanently. This is a problem." Harold studied his client's face. He'd seen that expression once before, during the original divorce proceedings when Tessa had tried to claim Vic was mentally unstable due to his military service. It was the face of a man who'd made a decision. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Blake Thornfield and my ex-wife just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They hurt my daughter, my only child, and then laughed about it. That requires a response." "A legal response, Vic?" "Of course." Vic's smile was cold. "But legal doesn't mean limited. I want you to start with the custody case. Emergency hearing, full custody, the works. I want their parental rights questioned. I want CPS crawling up their asses with a microscope." "That's doable. What else?" "I want to know everything about Blake Thornfield. Everything. Background, finances, family, debts, secrets, all of it. And I want a same deep dive on Tessa. There are things we missed the first time around." Harold nodded slowly. "I can arrange for a private investigator." "No need. I still have contacts from my consulting work. People who specialize in comprehensive background research." "Vic, whatever you're planning. I'm planning to be a good father who protects his daughter from people who would harm her. Nothing more, nothing less." But Harold caught the underlying steel in Vic's voice, and he knew that Blake and Tessa had no idea what was coming for them. Chapter 3. The First Move. 3 days later, Vic sat in his home office, surrounded by documents and photographs. Emma was at school, her first day back, though he'd arranged for a counselor to be available. She was resilient, like her father, but the incident had shaken her more than she was letting on. His contact, Maria Santos, had delivered results faster than expected. Maria was a former CIA analyst who now ran a boutique investigation firm that catered to clients who needed information quickly and quietly. Vic had used her services before for client security assessments, and she owed him a favor from a situation in Miami 2 years ago. Blake Thornfield's file made for interesting reading. 29 years old, originally from Portland. He'd moved to Seattle 18 months ago, around the time he'd started sleeping with Tessa. His yoga instructor certification was legitimate, but barely. He'd gotten it through a weekend course, not the extensive training he claimed. More interesting was his employment history. 5 jobs in 3 years, all ending with him being fired or quitting under suspicious circumstances. The most damning information was financial. Blake was drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, and 3 months behind on his car payments. He'd been evicted from his last apartment, which explained why he'd moved in with Tessa so quickly. The man was essentially a parasite, latching onto women for financial support. But it was the personal information that truly interested Vic. Blake had a pattern. Target older women with money and children, play the sensitive younger man role, then gradually isolate them from friends and family while draining their resources. Tessa was his 3rd such relationship in 5 years. Tessa's file revealed different problems. Since the divorce, she'd been spending far beyond her means. Expensive cars, designer clothes, frequent trips. Her marketing job at a mid-level firm barely covered her mortgage, let alone her lifestyle. She'd been supplementing her income through credit cards and had recently taken out a substantial personal loan. More troubling was the pattern of behavior Maria had uncovered. 3 different neighbors had reported seeing Emma left alone at the house for hours at a time. Tessa had been spotted at bars and clubs regularly, often with Blake, apparently unconcerned about her daughter's whereabouts. Vic's phone buzzed. Harold with an update. Emergency custody hearing is set for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Judge Morrison is presiding. Good news for us. She's tough on child endangerment. CPS filed their preliminary report this morning. It's not pretty for Tessa and Blake. What's the CPS recommendation? Immediate supervised visitation only, pending full investigation. They're particularly concerned about Blake's unsupervised access to Emma. In the criminal investigation, Detective Rodriguez says they're looking at charges of child endangerment and possibly reckless endangerment. Blake's blood alcohol level from the hospital was 0.18. He was blackout drunk when he threw an 8-year-old out of the house. Vic felt satisfaction flow through him like warm honey. The legal system was working exactly as it should. But it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. That evening, he made a series of phone calls. The first was to Tommy Ricci, a former Marine buddy who now worked in reputation management for high-profile clients. Tommy specialized in making problems disappear or making them very visible when that served his clients better. Vic, how's civilian life treating you? It's complicated, Tommy. I need a favor. Big one. Name it. Vic explained the situation, focusing on the facts. Blake's pattern of targeting women, his financial parasitism, his endangerment of Emma. Tommy listened without interruption. So you want this guy's life turned inside out? I want him exposed for what he is. Publicly. Thoroughly. I want every woman in Seattle to know that Blake Thornfield is a predator who targets single mothers and endangers children. I can work with that. Social media campaign, local news connections, maybe some strategic leaks to mom blogger networks. What's your timeline? Start tomorrow, after the custody hearing. I want maximum impact. The second call was to Marcus Webb, who ran a private security firm that Vic had worked with on client assessments. Marcus specialized in the kind of surveillance and intelligence gathering that existed in legal gray areas. Marcus, I need eyes on 2 people. Full surveillance package, financial, personal, professional. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, what they buy, everything. Duration, until I say stop. This is personal, isn't it? Someone hurt my daughter. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He had kids of his own. Consider done. No charge. The third call was the most important. Rachel Kim was an investigative journalist with the Seattle Herald who specialized in exposing predators and scammers. Vic had helped her with a story about financial fraud targeting veterans 2 years ago, providing background on military financial scams. Rachel, it's Vic Castellano. I have a story for you. A guy named Blake Thornfield who preys on single mothers, has a pattern of endangering children, and just put my 8-year-old daughter in the hospital. I'm listening. I'm sending you a file. Everything's documented, verified, legally obtained. This guy is a serial predator, and he's going to do this again unless someone stops him. What's your angle here, Vic? This is clearly personal. My angle is that predators shouldn't be allowed to hunt freely. You helped expose that veteran fraud ring because it was the right thing to do. This is the same principle. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Send me the file. If it checks out, I'll run with it. By midnight, Vic had set 12 different operations in motion. Legal, financial, social, and professional pressure that would systematically dismantle Blake Thornfield's life and ability to harm anyone else's family. It was just the beginning. Tessa thought she'd gotten away with endangering his daughter. Blake thought his actions had no consequences. They were both wrong. Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. The custody hearing went exactly as Vic had hoped. Judge Morrison took one look at the police report, the hospital records, and the CPS investigation and awarded him immediate full custody. Tessa was granted supervised visitation only 2 hours every other weekend, with a court-appointed supervisor present. Blake wasn't allowed any contact with Emma whatsoever. Tessa had shown up to court with a public defender, clearly unprepared for the onslaught of evidence Harold presented. She tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that Blake had been overwhelmed and made a mistake. Judge Morrison's response had been swift and brutal. Ms. Malone, your husband threw an 8-year-old child out of the house at midnight while intoxicated. This court considers that conduct inexcusable and indicative of unfitness for unsupervised parental responsibility. Blake hadn't even attended the hearing. That afternoon, while Emma was at school and safely unaware of illegal proceedings, Vic met with Marcus Webb at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Marcus slid a tablet across the table containing the first day's surveillance results. Your ex-wife and her husband are having a very bad week, Marcus said with satisfaction. The photos told a clear story. Blake had spent the morning at 3 different payday loan shops, apparently trying to raise cash. All had turned him down. Tessa had been at her lawyer's office for 2 hours, then at her bank for another hour. The bank meeting hadn't gone well, judging by her body language as she left. Financial pressure? Vic asked, building rapidly. Here's the interesting part. Blake's been making calls to his ex-girlfriends, the ones from his previous relationships. He's trying to reconnect, probably looking for another landing pad. And 2 of them hung up on him. The third, a woman named Jennifer Price in Portland, talked to him for 30 minutes. We intercepted enough to know he was asking if he could visit for a few days. Vic studied the surveillance photos. Blake looked desperate, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from the day before. He's running. Gets better. Tommy's social media campaign launched this morning. Hashtag Blake Thornfield Exposed is trending locally. Rachel Kim's story goes live tomorrow in the Herald. And there's something else. Marcus pulled up another file on the tablet. Blake's got a warrant out for his arrest. What? Unpaid child support. Turns out he has a 6-year-old son in Portland from a previous relationship. He's been dodging payments for 2 years. The mother finally got fed up and pressed charges. Seattle PD got the warrant this morning. Vic felt pieces clicking into place. So he's not just a predator. He's a deadbeat dad who abandons his own children. Serial pattern. Kid in Portland, another one in Sacramento, he's never even met. This guy doesn't just target single mothers, he creates them. The information was perfect ammunition for what Vic had planned next. He made a mental note to have Rachel Kim include the deadbeat dad angle in her story. Public opinion was harsh on men who abandoned their children, especially when they were also endangering other people's kids. What about Tessa? Desperate. She tried to get a loan extension at the bank, was turned down. Made 3 calls to her parents in California. They hung up on her the first 2 times, took the 3rd call, but we couldn't intercept the content. Based on her reaction afterward, they said no to whatever she was asking for. Marcus closed the tablet. Vic, what exactly are you building toward here? Because this level of pressure is going to force them into doing something stupid. That's the idea. I need to know if you're planning anything that could blow back on you legally. I got a family to think about. Vic met his friend's eyes. Everything I'm doing is completely legal. I'm exposing a predator and protecting my daughter. If Blake and Tessa make bad decisions as a result of their own criminal behavior coming to light, that's not my fault. Marcus nodded slowly. Just remember, sometimes cornered animals bite. That evening, Vic picked Emma up from school and took her for ice cream. She was quieter than usual, clearly still processing the trauma of a few days ago. As they sat in the shop, she finally spoke. "Daddy, am I going to have to see Blake again?" "No, sweetheart. The judge said you don't have to see Blake anymore." "What about Mommy?" This was the harder question. "You'll still see Mommy sometimes, but only when there's another adult there to make sure you're safe." Emma nodded solemnly. "Good. Blake scared me. And Mommy..." She trailed off. "What about Mommy? She used to be different. Before Blake. She was nicer to me." Out of the mouths of babes. Vic realized that Emma had recognized what he'd only recently understood. Blake had been systematically isolating Tessa from her daughter, poisoning their relationship. It was classic predator behavior, designed to make the mother more dependent on the abuser. "Emma, I want you to know that none of what happened was your fault. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not the other way around." "I know, Daddy. That's why I like living with you better. You never tell me to go outside in the dark." That night, after Emma was asleep, Vic sat in his office reviewing the dossiers Maria had compiled on Blake's previous victims. 3 women, all single mothers, all left financially and emotionally devastated after Blake moved on. One had lost her house. Another had filed bankruptcy. The third had suffered a nervous breakdown and temporarily lost custody of her own children. The pattern was clear, methodical, and utterly without conscience. Blake Thornfield was a parasite who fed on vulnerable women and left destroyed families in his wake. The fact that he'd endangered Emma was just his latest escalation in a career of predatory behavior. Vic's phone rang. "Rachel Kim." "Vic, I've been digging into this Blake Thornfield story. It's worse than what you sent me." "How much worse?" "I found 2 more women he victimized. One in Phoenix, one in Denver. Same pattern. Single mother, financial dependency, gradual isolation. The Denver woman's 8-year-old son ended up in foster care for 3 months because Blake convinced her the kid was holding her back from happiness." Vic's blood went cold. He talked a mother into abandoning her child. Temporarily. She got him back after Blake moved on, but the damage was done. CPS records show the kid still has trust issues. Are these women willing to go on record? 2 of them are. They want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. My editors approved a full investigative series, 3 parts, starting tomorrow. Front page, above the fold. Good. The more people who know what he is, the better. Vic, there's something else. Something I haven't been able to verify yet, but if it's true, it changes everything. What is it? I think Blake Thornfield isn't his real name. Chapter 5. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Rachel Kim's story hit Seattle like a thunderbolt. The Predator Next Door. How Blake Thornfield targets Seattle's single mothers, ran with photos, documented evidence, and interviews with 3 of his victims. By noon, it was the most shared story in the Herald's online history. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Blake's yoga studio fired him within hours of publication. His landlord, Tessa's landlord, since Blake was on the lease, serve an eviction notice citing the moral turpitude clause in their rental agreement. The local news stations picked up the story for their evening broadcasts. But it was the social media reaction that truly destroyed him. Seattle's mom bloggers and neighborhood Facebook groups shared the story with warnings to watch for Blake at schools, playgrounds, and community centers. His photo was posted with captions like "Child Endangerer" and "Predator Alert." Someone created a fake dating profile using his photos with the tagline, "I throw children out of houses." Vic monitored it all from his office, feeling a cold satisfaction as he watched Blake's life systematically dismantle itself. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from Marcus, Tommy, and Rachel. Marcus, Target hasn't left the house all day. Neighbors are gathering outside with protest signs. Tommy, local mom bloggers are organizing a shame parade for this afternoon. This guy is about to become the most hated man in Seattle. Rachel, working on part 2 of the series. The name issue is bigger than we thought. The most interesting call came from Detective Rodriguez. "Mr. Castellano, I wanted to update you on the criminal case. We arrested Blake Thornfield this morning on the child endangerment charges, plus the outstanding warrant from Portland. How's he handling custody? Not well. He's demanding a lawyer, but can't afford one. More interesting is that he's claiming his name isn't actually Blake Thornfield." Vic felt a familiar tingle, the sensation of a puzzle piece clicking into place. What's he claiming his real name is? Says he's Blake Thompson, and that Thornfield is an alias he's been using for the past 3 years. If that's true, it means he's been committing identity fraud on top of everything else. Any way to verify? We're working on it. But here's the thing. If he's been using a false identity, it calls into question everything about his background. His employment history, his certifications, his relationships, all of it could be fraudulent. After Rodriguez hung up, Vic immediately called Maria Santos. Maria, I need you to run a full identity verification on Blake Thornfield. Detective Rodriguez says he might be using an alias. On it. If this guy's been running a long-term false identity, I'll find a real one. 2 hours later, Maria called back with results that exceeded even Vic's expectations. Blake Thornfield is indeed an alias. Real name is Blake Anthony Thompson, age 31. Here's where it gets interesting. Thompson has a criminal record going back to age 18. Multiple arrests for fraud, identity theft, and domestic violence. He did 18 months in Oregon State Penitentiary for bilking elderly women out of their retirement savings. So he's a career criminal. Gets better. The domestic violence charges were from his relationship with the mother of his oldest child, the one in Portland. According to court records, he broke her nose during an argument about child support. She got a restraining order, which he violated 3 times before skipping town. Vic was taking notes, his mind already working through the implications. What about the Thornfield identity? Where did that come from? Identity theft. Blake Thornfield was a real person. Yoga instructor who died in a car accident in Nevada 3 years ago. Thompson stole his identity, moved to Seattle, and started fresh. All his certifications, his employment history as Thornfield, it's all fraudulent. Maria, you're brilliant. Can you document all of this legally? Already done. I've got court records, prison records, police reports, even the death certificate of the real Blake Thornfield. This guy isn't just a predator. He's a professional criminal who's been running cons for over a decade. Vic immediately forwarded the information to Detective Rodriguez, Harold Brennan, and Rachel Kim. Within an hour, the story had exploded into something much bigger than a local predator expose. Blake Thompson was wanted in 3 states for various crimes, and his arrest in Seattle was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. But the most satisfying call came from Tessa. Vic, you have to help me. Her voice was shaking, desperate. The police want to question me about Blake's identity. They think I might have known he was using a fake name. Did you? No. I swear I had no idea. But they're treating me like I'm some kind of accomplice. The media is camping outside my house. I lost my job this morning because they said I was a liability. My landlord is trying to evict me. Vic let the silence stretch, savoring her panic. Vic, please. Emma's my daughter too. You can't want her to see her mother destroyed like this. Emma's my daughter, Vic said quietly, and you handed her over to a violent criminal with a fake identity. You never bothered to run a background check on a man you let live in your house with my child. I didn't know. You didn't care. There's a difference. What do you want? Tell me what you want and I'll do it. Vic considered his response carefully. He could destroy Tessa completely. Her reputation was already in ruins, her finances were collapsing, and her association with Blake had made her radioactive in Seattle social circles. But there was something more valuable than total destruction. I want you to sign over full custody of Emma. Permanent, irrevocable custody with no visitation rights. The line went silent for a long moment. Vic, you can't ask me to give up my daughter completely. I'm not asking. I'm offering you a way out of this mess. Sign the custody papers, and I'll make sure the police understand you were a victim of Blake's deception rather than an accomplice. Refuse, and I'll make sure every detail of your negligence and poor judgment becomes public knowledge. You're blackmailing me. I'm protecting my daughter from people who've proven they can't be trusted with her safety. Your choice, Tessa. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was broken. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. Vic hung up and immediately called Harold to prepare the custody modification papers. By this time tomorrow, Emma would be solely and permanently his daughter, free from the chaos and danger her mother had brought into her life. Blake Thompson was facing multiple felony charges and would likely spend the next decade in prison. Tessa was facing social and financial ruin, with her only escape route requiring her to give up her daughter. It was almost enough. Almost. Chapter 6. The Noose Tightens. 22 hours later, Tessa signed the papers. Harold Brennan's office had never seen someone so thoroughly defeated. She'd lost 20 pounds in the past week. Her hair was unwashed, and her hands shook as she scrawled her signature across the documents that severed her legal connection to Emma forever. "You realize this is permanent?" Harold asked, fulfilling his legal obligation to ensure she understood the implications. "You're relinquishing all parental rights. No visitation, no contact without Mr. Castellano's explicit permission, no claim to decision-making regarding Emma's welfare or future." "I understand." Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. Vic watched from across the table, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no regret. This woman had endangered his daughter and then laughed about it. She deserved everything that was happening to her. After Tessa left, Harold poured himself a scotch despite it being only noon. "I've been practicing family law for 30 years, Vic. I've never seen someone's life implode so completely in such a short time. She made her choices. Blake Thompson, sure. But Tessa, some of what's happened to her seems almost orchestrated." Vic met his lawyer's eyes. "Consequences aren't always proportional to actions, Harold. Sometimes they're proportional to the damage those actions could have caused. Emma could have died that night." Harold nodded slowly. "What's next?" "Because Blake Thompson is looking at serious prison time, and Tessa is basically a social pariah. Your daughter is safe. You have full custody. You've won." "Have I? What more could you want?" Vic was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. "Blake Thompson has destroyed how many families over the years? 5? 6? And he was just getting started. Even with him in prison, there are other predators out there doing the same thing to other families. Vic, you can't save every family from every predator." "No, but I can make sure this particular predator never hurts anyone again." He's looking at 15 to 20 years. Prison isn't permanent. People get paroled, charges get reduced, sentences get commuted. Blake Thompson is a career criminal who's spent his entire adult life targeting vulnerable women and children. He'll do this again the moment he gets the chance. Harold set down his scotch glass. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that some problems require permanent solutions." That evening, Vic had dinner with Emma at their favorite restaurant. She was happier than she'd been in weeks, chatting about school, her friends, a book she was reading. The custody agreement meant she wouldn't have to navigate the confusion and stress of visits with her mother anymore. For an 8-year-old, the simplicity was a relief. "Daddy, am I going to see Mommy anymore?" "Only if you want to, sweetheart. And only when you're older and can decide for yourself." "I don't think I want to." She chose Blake over me. The statement was delivered matter-of-factly, without anger or sadness. Emma had processed the situation with the brutal clarity that children sometimes possess. Tessa had indeed chosen Blake over her daughter's safety, and now she was facing the consequences of that choice. After Emma went to bed, Vic made a series of phone calls. The first was to Detective Rodriguez. "Detective, it's Vic Castellano. I wanted to ask about Blake Thompson's legal situation." "Well, he's been charged with child endangerment, identity fraud, violation of restraining order, and failure to pay child support. The Portland DA is also filing additional charges for the domestic violence incidents. He's looking at serious time." "How serious?" 15 to 20 years if he goes to trial and loses. Maybe 10 to 12 if he pleads out. And then he's free to do this again. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Castellano, I understand you're angry, but the criminal justice system failed to prevent him from endangering my daughter because he was using a false identity that hid his criminal history. How many other Blake Thornfields are out there right now, targeting families?" "I can't answer that." "I can. Maria Santos found evidence of at least 3 other false identities Thompson has used over the years. This isn't his first time disappearing and reinventing himself. and it won't be his last. The second call was to Marcus Webb. Marcus, I need a different kind of surveillance. I want to know everything about Blake Thompson's time in prison. Who he talks to, who visits him, what his plans are when he gets out. Vic, prison surveillance is complicated, expensive, probably illegal. I'm not asking you to bug his cell. I'm asking you to monitor his communications, his visitor logs, his correspondence. All of that is technically public record. For 15 to 20 years. For as long as it takes. The third call was the most important. Danny Reeves was a former Delta Force operator who now ran a very specialized consulting firm. His clients were typically governments or corporations dealing with problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. Vic had worked with Danny twice, once in Colombia, once in Eastern Europe. Both situations had involved permanently resolving threats to American civilians. Danny, it's Vic Castellano. Vic, Jesus, it's been what, 3 years? How's retirement treating you? Retirement ended when someone put my daughter in the hospital. Danny's tone shifted immediately. Talk to me. Vic explained the situation, Blake Thompson's criminal history, his pattern of targeting families, his use of false identities to evade law enforcement. He detailed the systematic destruction of women's lives, the children left traumatized and abandoned, the likelihood that Thompson would continue his predatory behavior after serving his prison sentence. So what are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to make sure Blake Thompson never hurts another family. That's a permanent solution, Vic. Some problems require permanent solutions. Danny was quiet for a long moment. This is personal for you. He threw my 8-year-old daughter out of a house at midnight in the middle of winter. She could have died. Kids involved changes the equation. What's your timeline? I want him to serve his prison sentence. Let the system do what it's designed to do. But when his release date approaches, whether that's 10 years or 20, I want him to disappear permanently. That's a long-term contract. Expensive. Money isn't an issue. It's not about money, Vic. It's about commitment. You're asking me to track a target for potentially decades, then eliminate him upon release. That's not a job. That's a crusade. Call it whatever you want. Are you interested or not? Danny was quiet for another moment. Send me the file. If Thompson is half as bad as you're describing, the world will be better off without him. After the calls, Vic sat in his office reviewing Emma's medical records from the hospital. The photos of her scratches and bruises, the documentation of her dehydration and hypothermia, the psychological evaluation that noted significant trauma consistent with abandonment and exposure. Blake Thompson had done this to his daughter, had laughed about it, had shown no remorse, no accountability, no recognition that he'd nearly killed a child through his negligence and cruelty. The legal system would punish him temporarily. Vic would ensure the punishment was permanent. Some sins were unforgivable. Some threats required elimination. Blake Thompson had made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. Chapter 7. The Long Game. 5 years passed. Emma was 13 now, a bright, confident teenager who excelled in school and showed no lasting effect from that terrible night behind the dumpster. She'd grown up knowing only stability and safety in her father's house, with no need to navigate the chaos her mother had brought into her life. Tessa had left Seattle 6 months after signing away her parental rights. Vic had kept track of her movements through Maria Santos, Portland first, then Los Angeles, finally settling in Phoenix near her parents. She'd never remarried, never had other children. The last report suggested she was working as a receptionist at a medical clinic and living in a modest apartment. Her social media presence was minimal, her life unremarkable. Blake Thompson was serving his sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Marcus Webb's prison monitoring had revealed exactly what Vic had expected. Thompson was planning his next con. He'd maintained correspondence with 3 different women he'd met through prison pen pal services, each believing herself to be his only contact with the outside world. He'd also been disciplined twice for manipulating younger inmates, demonstrating that his predatory behavior continued even behind bars. More concerning was Thompson's correspondence with his cellmate, Robert Vance, a white-collar criminal who specialized in identity theft. Marcus had intercepted enough communications to confirm that Thompson and Vance were planning to work together after their releases. Vance would provide new identities, Thompson would run the cons, and they'd split the profits while maintaining plausible deniability for each other's crimes. Danny Reeves had checked in annually, confirming his contract remained active and his surveillance of Thompson was ongoing. The timeline was still years away. Thompson wouldn't be eligible for parole until 2031 at the earliest, but Danny was a patient man who understood the value of long-term planning. Vic had used those 5 years productively. His security consulting business had expanded into a full-service firm specializing in protecting high-net-worth families from exactly the kind of predator Thompson represented. He'd developed comprehensive background check protocols, threat assessment systems, and response strategies that had prevented dozens of families from falling victim to financial and emotional parasites. More importantly, he'd used his resources and connections to quietly hunt down other predators operating in the Pacific Northwest. 3 men had been exposed and prosecuted based on intelligence Vic had provided to law enforcement. 2 others had simply disappeared after Vic's contacts had made it clear their behavior was being monitored. Emma knew none of this, of course. To her, her father was simply a security consultant who worked with important clients and traveled occasionally for business. She had no idea that Blake Thompson was still alive, still planning, still a threat that would someday need to be eliminated. On a rainy Thursday evening in November, Vic received the call he'd been expecting for years. "Vic, it's Marcus. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Thompson's parole hearing got moved up. Instead of 2031, he's going before the board in 6 months. His lawyer is arguing good behavior, overcrowding, some new rehabilitation program he completed." Vic felt the familiar cold focus settle over him. What are his chances? Better than they should be. Prison reform advocates have been pushing for earlier releases for nonviolent offenders. Identity fraud and child endangerment don't carry the same weight as murder or assault. He's not nonviolent. His ex-girlfriend with a broken nose would disagree with that classification. That was in Oregon, different jurisdiction. The Washington charges were all classified as nonviolent crimes. Vic was already moving, pulling Thompson's file from his safe, reviewing Danny Reeves' contact information. What's the timeline if he gets paroled? Release date would be May 15th, 2026. 5 months from now. And Vance, released 3 months ago. He's living in Spokane under a new identity, David Morris. Already set up a fake identity production business disguised as a document restoration service. The pieces were falling into place exactly as Vic had predicted 5 years ago. Thompson would be released, would connect with Vance, would acquire a new identity, and would immediately begin targeting new victims. Within months, another family would be destroyed, another child would be traumatized, another woman would be left financially and emotionally devastated. Unless Vic stopped it. "Marcus, I need complete surveillance on Thompson's release plan. Where he's planning to live, who he's planning to contact, what his first moves will be." Already on it. His correspondence suggests he's planning to meet Vance in Spokane, get a new identity, then head to California. Apparently, there's a wealthy widow in San Diego he's been grooming through letters. Jesus. He's already got his next victim lined up. Gets worse. The widow has a 10-year-old daughter. Vic closed his eyes, seeing Emma at 8 years old, small and frightened in that hospital bed. Seeing another child who would soon face the same terror if he didn't act. "Marcus, cancel all other surveillance projects. I want every resource focused on Thompson until this is resolved." "Understood. What about the family?" "What family?" "Emma. If you're planning what I think you're planning, there could be blowback. Legal consequences. You need to think about her future." Vic had been thinking about Emma's future for 5 years. About her safety, her happiness, her ability to grow up in a world where predators like Blake Thompson couldn't reach her. Emma's future is exactly what I'm protecting. After Marcus hung up, Vic made 2 more calls. The first was to Danny Reeves. "Danny, timeline just accelerated. Target is likely to be released in May. I'll be ready. What's the preferred scenario?" "Clean disappearance. No body, no investigation, no connection to his past crimes or victims. I want him to simply vanish without a trace. Understood. Payment terms remain the same. Triple them. This needs to be perfect. The second call was to Harold Brennan. Harold, I need you to prepare something for me. A detailed legal document outlining Emma's care and custody in the event something happens to me. Vic, what's going on? Just contingency planning. If I'm ever unable to care for Emma, travel accident, health issues, whatever, I want ironclad documentation of who becomes her guardian and how her finances are managed. Who are you naming as guardian? My mother. Elena's fully recovered from her stroke. She's only 73, and Emma adores her. Second choice is my sister in Colorado. Harold was quiet for a moment. This isn't about travel accidents, is it? It's about making sure Emma is protected no matter what happens. Vic, whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything illegal, Harold. I'm just ensuring my daughter's future is secure. It wasn't technically a lie. What Danny Reeves would do to Blake Thompson wouldn't be Vic's direct action. And Emma's future truly was what mattered. But as Vic sat in his office that night, reviewing Thompson's file one last time, he knew that some decisions carried permanent consequences. He'd made peace with those consequences 5 years ago, the moment he'd held his traumatized daughter in that hospital room. Blake Thompson had sealed his fate when he'd thrown an 8-year-old child into a winter night and laughed about it. Everything that had happened since, the investigation, the imprisonment, the surveillance, the planning, had been inevitable consequences of that single moment of cruelty. In 5 months, Thompson would walk out of prison believing he'd served his time and paid his debt to society. He'd connect with his criminal partner, acquire a new identity, and begin hunting his next victim. He would never reach her. Some threats required permanent elimination. Some predators couldn't be allowed to hunt again. Blake Thompson was about to learn that some fathers never forget and never forgive. Chapter 8. The Final Calculation. The parole hearing took place on a cold Tuesday morning in March. Vic sat in the gallery, watching Blake Thompson, clean-shaven, wearing a borrowed suit, projecting the image of a reformed man, present his case to the board. Thompson spoke eloquently about his rehabilitation, his remorse for his past actions, his commitment to making amends and living lawfully. It was a masterful performance. Thompson had always been an excellent liar. The parole board deliberated for 2 hours before announcing their decision. Parole granted, with release scheduled for May 15th. Thompson would serve the remainder of his sentence under supervised probation, with requirements to maintain employment, submit to regular drug testing, and avoid contact with his previous victims. Vic watched Thompson's face as the decision was announced. For just a moment, the mask slipped. The expression that crossed Thompson's features wasn't relief or gratitude. It was predatory satisfaction. The look of a hunter who'd successfully convinced the sheep he was harmless. After the hearing, Vic followed Thompson's transport van back to the prison, then drove to a truck stop 20 miles away where Danny Reeves was waiting. He's out in 2 months, Vic said, sliding into the booth across from Danny. I saw. My contact inside says he's already made arrangements to be picked up by someone calling himself David Morris. That's Vance, his identity theft partner. Danny nodded. I've been tracking Morris since his release. He's good, very good. New workshop, legitimate front business, high-quality documentation. If Thompson gets one of Morris's identities, he'll be virtually untraceable through normal channels. But not through your channels. Nothing's untraceable if you know where to look. Danny pulled out a tablet and showed Vic surveillance photos of a man in his 40s working in what appeared to be a document restoration shop. Morris runs his operation out of a legitimate business in Spokane. He's got 3 employees who don't know what he really does, and he takes on just enough real restoration work to justify the equipment and the business license. How does the identity creation work? Birth certificates of deceased infants, social security numbers from people who died young and never established credit histories, driver's licenses from states with lax verification requirements. By the time Morris is finished, his customers have complete life histories going back decades. Danny swiped to another photo showing Thompson and Morris in the prison visiting room. They've met 6 times in the past year. Based on the correspondence we've intercepted, Thompson's getting an identity package that includes a California driver's license, credit cards, even a partially established credit history. The new identity has already been created, waiting for him. Marcus Morrison, age 33, born in Nevada, relocated to California for work. Clean record, good credit, the whole package. Vic studied the photos. Where's Thompson planning to go first? San Diego. He's been corresponding with a widow named Catherine Walsh. 45 years old. Husband died in a car accident 2 years ago. Left her with a 10-year-old daughter and a 7-figure insurance settlement. The familiar cold fury settled in Vic's chest. He's already groomed her. 18 months of letters. Started with a sob story about being wrongly imprisoned, gradual escalation to romance. Promises to take care of her and her daughter when he gets out. Classic long con setup. What's the daughter's name? Sophie. 10 years old. Homeschooled. Shy according to Thompson's intelligence gathering. Walsh posted photos on social media before Thompson made contact. He specifically targeted her after seeing pictures of the daughter. The implications made Vic's stomach turn. Thompson wasn't just targeting another wealthy woman. He was specifically targeting a family with a vulnerable child. The homeschooling meant fewer outside observers. The recent loss of father figure meant emotional vulnerability, and the insurance settlement meant substantial financial resources to exploit. Danny, I want this finished before he reaches San Diego. That's the plan. Thompson will be picked up by Morris on May 15th, driven to the identity handoff location, and then Danny made a subtle gesture. Disappearance between Spokane and the California border. No witnesses, no evidence, no body. What about Morris? Different problem, different solution. Morris will be too scared to ever report Thompson missing, and too smart to ask questions about what happened. He'll assume Thompson decided to disappear on his own, which is exactly what his clients sometimes do. Vic nodded. It was a clean plan, professionally executed, with minimal risk of exposure. Thompson would simply vanish, leaving no trace and no connections to his past crimes or victims. What do you need from me? Final payment and final confirmation. Once this begins, there's no stopping it. Vic pulled out an envelope containing $50,000 in cash, the balance of Danny's fee. Consider this final confirmation. Danny pocketed the envelope without counting it. One last question, Vic. You're sure about this? Because once Thompson is gone, there's no undoing it. I've been sure for 5 years. As they parted ways, Vic felt a strange sense of completion. 5 years of planning, surveillance, and preparation were coming to an end. In 2 months, Blake Thompson would cease to exist, and the threat he represented would be permanently eliminated. That evening, Vic had dinner with Emma at their favorite restaurant. The same place they'd eaten the night she'd learned she wouldn't have to see her mother anymore. Emma was excited about high school starting in the fall, chattering about course selections and after-school activities. Dad, can I ask you something? Typed on Thompson's typewriter, signed with his handwriting sample, postmarked from Nevada. She'll be disappointed, but not suspicious. Catherine Walsh and her 10-year-old daughter Sophie would never know how close they'd come to being destroyed by a predator. They would never experience the trauma Emma had endured that night behind the dumpster. Sophie would never be thrown out of her house in the middle of winter by a drunken stepfather who laughed about her terror. They were safe because Blake Thompson no longer existed. Danny, this concludes our business arrangement. Understood. It's been a pleasure working with you, Vic. The world's a better place without that particular problem in it. After Danny hung up, Vic sat in his office for a long time, looking at Thompson's file. 5 years of surveillance reports, criminal records, victim statements, and planning documents. Evidence of a career criminal who'd spent his entire adult life destroying families and traumatizing children. Now it was just paper. The threat it represented was gone. Vic fed the entire file into his shredder, watching years of documentation disappear into confetti. When the last page was destroyed, he emptied the shredder bin into a trash bag and carried it out to his car. The remains would be burned in his fireplace that evening, ensuring no trace remained of his connection to Blake Thompson's disappearance. At dinner, Emma was unusually quiet. Everything okay, sweetheart? I had that nightmare again last night. About Blake and that night. Vic studied his daughter's face. She was older now, more mature, better able to process traumatic memories. But the scars from that night would always be part of her, just as they were part of him. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. It's just, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel completely safe. Like, what if there are other people like Blake out there? What if they target our family again? Vic reached across the table and took Emma's hand. Sweetheart, there will always be bad people in the world, but they won't hurt our family. I won't let them. How can you be sure? Because I'm your father, and protecting you is the most important thing I'll ever do. There's nothing I wouldn't do to keep you safe. Emma squeezed his hand. I know, Dad. I've always known that. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Vic built a fire in his fireplace and burned the shredded remains of Thompson's file. As the paper turned to ash, he thought about the choices he'd made, the lines he'd crossed, the man he'd become. 5 years ago, he'd been a law-abiding citizen who trusted the legal system to protect his family. Then Blake Thompson had thrown his 8-year-old daughter out of a house at midnight and laughed about it. The legal system had responded with supervised visitation and a sentence that would have eventually freed Thompson to victimize other families. That hadn't been enough. Not nearly enough. So Vic had become something else. Something harder, more ruthless, more willing to cross lines that others respected. He'd become the kind of father who didn't just call the police when his child was threatened. He'd become the kind of man who eliminated threats permanently. He regretted nothing. Thompson had made a career of destroying families and traumatizing children. He'd shown no remorse, no accountability, no intention of changing his behavior. He'd been planning to do it again the moment he was released from prison. Now he was gone. The world was safer without him in it. Emma was safer. Catherine Walsh and her daughter Sophie were safer. Every potential future victim was safer. As the last of the paper burned to ash, Vic's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dad picked me up from soccer practice today. Says he's taking me to Disney World next month. Can't wait. Love, Sophie. The text was clearly meant for someone else. Probably a wrong number or a misdirected message. But the timing felt like cosmic confirmation that he'd made the right choice. Somewhere in San Diego, a 10-year-old girl was excited about a trip with her father, blissfully unaware that a predator had been targeting her family. She would never know how close she'd come to experiencing the same trauma Emma had endured. She would grow up safe and protected, with a childhood unmarred by the kind of terror Thompson specialized in inflicting. That was worth everything Vic had sacrificed to make it happen. The fire burned down to embers as Vic sat in his chair, watching the last traces of Blake Thompson disappear into smoke and ash. Tomorrow, he would return to his normal life, running his security business, raising his daughter, living quietly in Seattle. But he would never again be the man who trusted the legal system to protect what mattered most. He would never again assume that prison sentences and supervised probation were sufficient responses to threats against his family. Some fathers were content to let others decide the fate of their children's predators. Vic Castellano was not one of those fathers, and he never would be again. Of course. Do you ever think about Blake? The guy who you know? Vic was careful to keep his expression neutral. Why do you ask? I had a nightmare about that night last week. First one in a long time. I was just wondering if he's still in prison. Yes, he's still in prison. Will he ever get out? Not for a very long time, sweetheart. And even if he does, he'll never be able to hurt you or anyone else again. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Good. I know it sounds mean, but I hope something bad happens to him. People who hurt kids should get what they deserve. Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had unconsciously articulated the same principle that had guided Vic's actions for 5 years. People who hurt children should face consequences proportional to the damage they could have caused. Thompson had nearly killed an 8-year-old child through deliberate negligence, then laughed about it. He'd spent years destroying families and traumatizing children. He was planning to do it again the moment he was released. He deserved exactly what was coming to him. As they drove home, Vic made a mental note to increase security around Emma during the coming months. Danny Reeves was a professional who'd never been connected to any of his previous work, but eliminating Thompson would be the end of a years-long operation. Loose ends needed to be tied up, contingencies needed to be addressed. Emma's safety remained the highest priority. Everything else was secondary. In 63 days, Blake Thompson would walk out of prison for the last time. He would never reach his intended victim. He would never hurt another child. Some fathers were content to let the legal system handle their family's threats. Vic Castellano was not one of those fathers. Chapter 9, The Last Sunset. May 15th arrived gray and cold, typical Seattle weather that matched Vic's mood perfectly. He stood in his office at 6 a.m., watching the sunrise through the window while holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Emma was still sleeping. She didn't have school for another 3 weeks, and 13-year-olds were notorious for sleeping late during summer break. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny Reeves, package ready for delivery. ETA, 3 p.m. Simple words that meant Blake Thompson would be dead by sunset. Vic had spent the morning reviewing security protocols for Emma one final time. His will and guardianship documents were updated and filed with Harold Brennan. His business affairs were in order. If anything went wrong, if Danny's operation was somehow compromised, if Thompson escaped, if there was any blowback, Emma would be protected and provided for. But nothing would go wrong. Danny Reeves had been eliminating problems for 20 years without a single failure. Thompson was just another problem that required a permanent solution. At 10 a.m., Marcus Webb called with the final surveillance update. Target was released on schedule, picked up by David Morris in a blue Honda Civic at 8:47 a.m. They're currently at Morris's document shop, finalizing the identity transfer. How's Thompson's mood? Confident. Relaxed. He's acting like a man who thinks he's gotten away with everything. He has gotten away with everything. That's the problem. Not for much longer. Danny's team is in position along the route to California. Clean intercept point about 40 miles south of Spokane. Isolated highway. No traffic cameras. What about cleanup? Handled. Thompson will simply disappear. Morris will assume he decided to lay low for a while, which is normal behavior for his clients. When Thompson doesn't make contact with the San Diego target, she'll assume he changed his mind. No investigation, no missing person report, no questions. It was exactly what Vic had planned 5 years ago. Thompson would vanish without a trace, leaving behind no evidence and no connections to his victims. The families he'd already destroyed would never know what happened to him. The family he'd planned to destroy next would be spared without ever knowing they'd been targeted. At 2 p.m., Emma wandered into the kitchen looking for lunch. Vic made her a sandwich and listened to her talk about plans with friends, summer reading assignments, and a movie she wanted to see. Normal 13-year-old concerns that she could enjoy because she lived in safety and stability. She would never have to worry about men like Blake Thompson. At 3:15 p.m., Vic's phone rang. Danny Reeves. Package delivered successfully. No complications, no witnesses, no evidence. Target has been permanently removed from circulation. Vic felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction, exactly, but completion. A 5-year mission was finally finished. Clean resolution? Completely clean. Morris has been debriefed and understands the situation. He won't be asking questions or reporting anything. The San Diego contact will receive a letter explaining that Marcus Morrison has decided to return to his ex-wife and won't be coming to California. What about the letter? And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.